Good evening all, and welcome back to Haunted Tales. Tonight, we set foot in the unforgiving wilderness of Alaska, a land of breathtaking beauty where wonder can swiftly unravel into nightmare. On these remote highways, through endless forests, and in the silence of forgotten villages, tourists have vanished, leaving behind only fragments of chilling stories. What I am about to share with you is not folklore, but a collection of accounts drawn from official reports, eyewitness testimonies, and cases that remain etched in mystery. These narratives reveal that in Alaska's frozen vastness, the line between the natural and the supernatural is perilously thin. If you are new to Haunted Tales, be sure to subscribe for nightly journeys into the dark corners of reality. Activate the notification bell so that when the shadows lengthen and the silence grows heavy, you will be the first to step into the darkness with us. Now, let us begin and venture into Alaska's icy grip, where those who sought adventure instead discovered the unimaginable. The Seward Highway is often called one of the most beautiful drives in America. Stretching 125 miles from Anchorage to Seward, it cuts through fjords, glaciers, and forests so dense they seem to swallow the sky. On one side lies Turnagain Arm, a silvery stretch of water famous for its violent bore tides. On the other, sheer cliffs rise into mist, crowned with jagged mountain peaks. In the daylight, it is breathtaking. At night, it becomes something else entirely. The road narrows into dark corridors where your headlights barely catch the curve ahead. Fog rolls off the water in heavy sheets, swallowing whole sections of asphalt. Cell service drops away, and for miles at a time, there is nothing but wilderness, the silence broken only by the hum of your engine and the occasional cry of a raven overhead. Long-haul truckers know it well. Many refuse to pull over at night, even at marked turnouts. They'll tell you stories about shadowy figures walking along the shoulder, headlights flickering without cause, and passengers glimpsed in rear-view mirrors that vanish when looked for directly. They call it the Corridor of Lost Travelers. In July of 1995, Daniel and Marissa Hart, a young couple from Oregon, flew into Anchorage with plans to spend 2 weeks exploring Alaska. They were teachers on summer break, outdoorsy and careful planners, the kind of people who packed extra maps and made itineraries down to the day. After a few days in Anchorage, they rented a white camper van and set out on the Seward Highway, planning to fish, hike, and eventually camp near Exit Glacier. The last confirmed sighting came from a gas station security camera in Girdwood. The tape showed them laughing, filling their tank, and buying snacks, pretzels, soda, and a disposable camera. It was 5:42 p.m. on July 8th. Marissa was wearing a red rain jacket. Daniel had on a gray sweatshirt. Both looked relaxed, unaware that the next few hours would become a mystery that remains unsolved nearly 3 decades later. When they failed to return the van by their rental deadline, authorities were contacted. A search began, focusing on the Seward stretch. It didn't take long for troopers to find the vehicle. It was discovered at a turnout near mile 52, just north of Moose Pass. The van was locked, but the keys were still in the ignition. Inside, investigators found their belongings untouched: passports, wallets, credit cards, backpacks, and neatly folded clothes. A half-empty bag of chips sat on the dashboard, stale but undisturbed. The disposable camera contained only 3 pictures, shots of Turnagain Arm taken earlier that day. There were no footprints in the dirt around the turnout. No blood, no signs of forced entry, nothing. For days, helicopters scoured the nearby woods. Divers searched the cold waters of Kenai Lake. Dogs combed the roadside, picking up only the faintest trace before losing it entirely. It was as though the couple had stepped out of their van and dissolved into the wilderness. That should have been the end of it. Another unsolved disappearance in a state with thousands. But then came the sightings. A trucker named James Colton was the first to report something strange. On July 15th, around 2 a.m., he passed the same turnout where the van had been found. He claimed he saw headlights flickering in the fog, as if a vehicle were turning on and off, over and over. He slowed, thinking someone was in distress, but when he drew closer, the lights went dark. The turnout was empty. The next night, another driver swore he saw a barefoot woman walking along the shoulder near Moose Pass. She wore a red jacket. When he slowed to offer help, she turned her head toward him. He described her face as unnaturally pale, like someone who had been out in the cold too long. In the instant he blinked, she was gone. Most unsettling of all was the account from Richard Lane, a veteran trucker with over 3 decades on Alaska's highways. He told investigators he was hauling freight through Turnagain Pass around 3 a.m. when his headlights illuminated 2 figures standing in the middle of the lane. He braked hard, horn blaring. The figures didn't move. They were just staring, he said later. A man and a woman. I swear on my life they looked like that couple on the news. Same clothes, same faces. But they weren't alive. Their skin looked gray, almost waxy, like mannequins. And their eyes. Their eyes didn't blink. By the time Lane's rig skidded to a stop, the road was empty. No one was there. Rumors spread quickly. Some locals believed the Harts had fallen victim to foul play and that the sightings were tricks of tired eyes. But others whispered older explanations. The Tlingit people speak of the Kushtaka, shape-shifting trickster spirits said to lure travelers with cries for help. Once you followed, they would lead you deeper into the wilderness until you were lost forever, your soul trapped. Another story speaks of Kalupalik, pale human-like beings with long fingernails that drag the lost beneath icy waters. More than one elder has pointed out that many disappearances in Alaska bear similarities to these legends. Footsteps that stop suddenly, belongings left untouched, entire parties vanishing without trace. For the Seward Highway specifically, truckers and troopers alike have added their own folklore. Some speak of the vanishing hitchhiker, a young woman in a red coat who appears on foggy nights waving for help. If you stop, she disappears. If you don't, she sometimes appears in the back seat of your vehicle, silent and staring, only to vanish when you look back. Even skeptics admit one detail is difficult to dismiss. Marissa Hart was wearing a red jacket on the day she disappeared. Investigators officially closed the case in 1997, citing unknown circumstances. Daniel and Marissa's families continue to hold annual memorials, but their bodies have never been found. The turnout where their van was discovered has become infamous. Locals avoid it at night. Travelers who stop there report strange sensations, sudden chills, the feeling of being watched, headlights flickering for no reason. A few claim to hear footsteps outside their cars when no one is there. One particularly chilling report came from a tourist in 2010. He had pulled over late at night to rest. Half asleep, he woke to tapping on his window. A woman stood outside barefoot, her hair wet and clinging to her face. She wore a red jacket. When he blinked, she was gone. He left immediately, shaking, convinced he had just seen Marissa's ghost. What happened to Daniel and Marissa Hart remains a mystery. Some say they slipped into the water and drowned, their bodies swept away by currents. Others believe they were murdered and their remains hidden. But among those who drive the Seward Highway often, a darker belief persists. The Dalton Highway is unlike any other road in America. Stretching 414 miles from Living Good to Dead Horse, it cuts across Alaska's most unforgiving terrain: tundra, mountains, permafrost, and endless miles of desolation. Built in the 1970s as a supply route for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, it was never intended for tourists. Yet year after year, curious travelers venture onto it, lured by its reputation as one of the loneliest and most dangerous roads in the world. Here, there are no towns for hundreds of miles. Gas stations are scarce. Cell service is non-existent. If your vehicle breaks down, you are alone, at the mercy of the wilderness. Truckers call it the Haul Road, and they treat it with respect bordering on superstition. They know the Dalton doesn't forgive mistakes. In the summer of 2003, a group of European tourists, 4 men and 2 women, rented a small tour bus in Fairbanks. They were from Germany and Austria, visiting Alaska for what was meant to be the trip of a lifetime. Their plan was simple: drive the Dalton Highway north, camp beneath the midnight sun, and see the Arctic Ocean before flying home. On June 18th, they were spotted at the Yukon River crossing. Cheerful and excited, taking pictures near the bridge. They told locals they planned to reach Coldfoot that evening. That was the last confirmed sighting. When they failed to check in at their prearranged lodge in Dead Horse 3 days later, authorities began to worry. A search was launched with helicopters scanning the barren landscape. They didn't have to search long. At mile 219 south of Adagun Pass, the tour bus was found pulled off onto a gravel turnout. The door hung open. The engine was off. Inside, things appeared wrong. The tourists' belongings were scattered across the seats, backpacks overturned, clothes strewn, cameras abandoned. Food wrappers littered the floor, some still containing uneaten meals. What chilled investigators most was the silence. There was no blood, no signs of violence, but also no trace of the 6 passengers. The bus looked as if they had simply stood up and walked out all at once. A ranger who arrived first described it like this. It felt staged, like they'd just stepped outside for a moment. But the air was heavy, wrong somehow. You could feel it pressing down on you. Footprints led away from the turnout, 6 sets in total. They wandered into the tundra before fanning out, each veering in a different direction. After a few hundred yards, they faded into the moss and gravel, vanishing as though swallowed by the land itself. Search teams spread across the valley, but the terrain was merciless. Fog rolled in and out. Winds howled down from the Brooks Range, carrying with them an unsettling sound, like faint voices calling across the tundra. Some searchers later admitted they thought they heard laughter, or the echo of a woman screaming, but when they followed, there was nothing. Over the following week, helicopters spotted strange shapes on the ground, figures lying still, then gone when approached. Dogs refused to track past certain points, whining and pulling away. In one case, a handler swore his dog barked furiously at an empty patch of tundra before bolting back toward the bus, tail tucked between its legs. No bodies were ever recovered. Truckers driving the Dalton in the years since still talk about the ghost bus. They claim to see it sometimes. Parked on the side of the road, headlights dim, door swinging in the wind. When they slow to look, it vanishes. Others report seeing passengers on the shoulder, waving for help. Pale figures with hollow eyes. A few brave drivers have pulled over, only to find nothing but silence and empty tundra stretching for miles. One trucker, Mike Hendricks, told his story in a 2007 radio interview. I was running north, past Adigan, around 2 a.m. Snow flurries, wind cutting like knives. I see a bus on the side of the road, old white with its door open. Thought it was broke down. As I get closer, I see people inside, maybe 6 or 7, just sitting in the seats. No movement, no faces, like shadows. I slow down, thinking I gotta help, but when my lights hit it directly, it just wasn't there. Road was empty. Not even tire tracks. Theories abound. Some suggest the group underestimated the Dalton and simply wandered too far, succumbing to exposure. But investigators find this odd. Why would 6 experienced travelers dressed for the weather all leave their food, gear, and vehicle at once? Why scatter in different directions? Why not stay together? Local folklore provides a darker explanation. The Inupiat people speak of the Inukuns, shadow beings that wander. Denali National Park is 6 million acres of raw wilderness, towering mountains, endless taiga, and valleys carved by glaciers. At its heart rises Denali itself, the tallest mountain in North America, looming more than 20,000 feet above the tundra. Tourists come from all over the world to see it, to drive the single 92-mile road that winds deep into the park, and to feel for a moment as if they have stepped back into a land untouched by time. But beauty here has always been balanced by danger. The Denali Park Road is narrow, winding, and remote. For most of its length, private vehicles are prohibited, leaving visitors to travel by shuttle bus or on foot. Rangers remind tourists constantly, this is not a theme park. There are grizzlies, wolves, and moose. Weather shifts suddenly. Distances deceive. If you stray too far, rescue may never come. In August of 2012, a 28-year-old tourist named Lauren Chambers traveled to Alaska from Colorado. She was an experienced hiker, a lover of solitude who often trekked alone in the Rockies. Friends described her as cautious, level-headed, and deeply respectful of nature. She had one goal, to hike a portion of the Denali Park Road on foot, then camp overnight near one of the backcountry units. On August 14th, Lauren boarded a shuttle bus bound for Ryerson Visitor Center. Other passengers later recalled her smiling, chatting with the driver, and taking photographs from the windows. She carried a backpack, a tent, and a red rain jacket tied around her waist. She mentioned she might hike a short spur trail before setting up camp. At mile 53, near Toklat River, she asked the driver to stop. She stepped off the bus, waved to the other passengers, and walked down a gravel path toward the river. That was the last confirmed sighting. When she failed to return for her scheduled shuttle the next day, rangers began a search. Her campsite was never located. No sign of her tent, no food wrappers, no fire pit, no gear, nothing. The only clue came from a pair of German tourists who swore they saw a lone hiker matching her description later that evening. They had been photographing the tundra when they spotted a woman in the distance, walking along the ridgeline. They raised their binoculars. The figure appeared to be Lauren. Same backpack, same red jacket. But something was off. She wasn't walking steadily. She was staggering, her head jerking side to side as if listening for something. The Germans called out. The woman stopped, looked directly at them, and then turned, disappearing over the ridge. When rescuers swept that area the following morning, they found no footprints, no trace. The official search lasted 12 days. Dozens of rangers, dogs, and volunteers scoured valleys and ridges. Helicopters buzzed low, scanning the tundra. Theories ran wild. Some suggested she had slipped crossing the Toklat River and been swept beneath the current. Others thought a bear attack had left no remains. But quietly, among rangers, another possibility was whispered, that she had walked into something older, something the park has always hidden. Denali is rich in folklore. The Athabascans tell stories of Nantinak, the hairy man, a massive shadowy creature that prowls the wilderness, stealing people away. Others speak of Inua, spirits tied to the land itself, said to lure the unprepared deeper and deeper until they vanish. Rangers don't officially acknowledge such tales, but many admit to experiencing strange things. Voices in the wind, flickers of movement at the edge of vision. Campsites disturbed with no tracks leading in or out. During Lauren's search, several rangers reported unsettling experiences. One swore he saw a red jacket through his binoculars on a distant slope, only for it to dissolve into the tundra like mist. Another claimed he heard a woman's voice calling his name, clear, insistent, though no one was near. The dogs, usually eager trackers, often refused to move, sitting down abruptly and staring into the brush with their ears pinned back. By day 9, morale was low. A storm rolled in, pounding the searchers with freezing rain. That night, one volunteer camping near the Toklat River claimed she woke to the sound of someone walking outside her tent. She unzipped the flap, expecting a ranger. Instead, she saw a figure standing 20 feet away. It was a woman, soaked, her hair hanging over her face. She wore a red jacket. The volunteer froze. She called out. The woman did not answer. She only tilted her head, unnaturally slow as if listening. Then she stepped backward into the fog and was gone. The volunteer reported the incident immediately, but no tracks were found. Officially, Lauren's case remains unsolved. Her family still returns to the park each August to leave flowers near the Toklat River. They believe she slipped, drowned, or fell prey to an animal. But among those who work the park road, the story has become something else entirely. Bus drivers tell new employees, if you see a woman in a red jacket waving on the roadside, don't stop. Some passengers swear they've glimpsed her in passing. A lone hiker on the tundra, her movements strange, her face obscured. Rangers say the backcountry around mile 53 carries an unsettling stillness, as if the land itself is waiting. One particularly disturbing report came in 2019 from a pair of backpackers who had camped near the river. Around midnight, they woke to distant laughter. At first, they thought it was another group, but the sound drew closer, circling their tent. It was a woman's laughter, soft and broken, as if echoing from underwater. They never saw her, but in the morning, around their campsite, they found boot prints, a single set, pressed. Deep into the mud, they matched the size and tread of the boots Lauren Chambers had been wearing. The vanished hiker remains one of Denali's most haunting mysteries. The park continues to warn visitors not to hike alone, not to stray far, and never to ignore the unpredictability of the land. But the truth is, the wilderness keeps its secrets. Whether Lauren slipped beneath the current, fell prey to an unseen predator, or crossed into something far stranger, we may never know. What is certain is this: on quiet nights along the park road, when the fog rolls low and the tundra falls silent, some travelers still claim to see her, a young woman in a red jacket, staggering across the ridge, looking for a way back. And if you hear her call your name, no matter how familiar the voice may sound, don't answer, because not everyone who vanishes in Denali stays gone. The Glen Highway is one of Alaska's lifelines. Stretching 179 miles from Anchorage to Glenallen, it winds through jagged mountains, braided rivers, and stretches of boreal forest so thick they swallow light. For many, it is the gateway to adventure, the path eastward to Wrangell-St. Elias, or north toward the Richardson Highway. But ask long-haul drivers or state troopers who patrol its darker stretches, and they'll tell you the Glen carries a reputation. Too many wrecks, too many unexplained vanishings, and far too many stories whispered in gas stations and roadside diners about travelers who set out along its length and never reached their destination. The most infamous of these is the disappearance of the Ryerson family in 1988. David and Carol Ryerson, along with their two children, Matthew, 12, and Hannah, 9, were tourists from Minnesota. They had come north in June for what was meant to be a summer of camping, fishing, and sightseeing. They rented an RV in Anchorage, stocked it with supplies, and planned a slow loop around south-central Alaska before returning in mid-July. On June 29th, they phoned relatives from Palmer, cheerful and excited. Their next stop, they said, would be a campground along the Glen Highway. They never arrived. When the Ryersons missed their next 2 check-in calls, family back home raised the alarm. Alaska State Troopers launched a search. It was not long before they found the RV. It sat on a gravel turnout near mile 118, about 30 miles east of Glenallen. The engine was off. The doors were locked. Through the windows, troopers saw the family's belongings scattered, jackets draped over seats, half-eaten sandwiches on the counter, a radio still tuned to a static-filled station. Nothing appeared stolen. When they forced entry, they found an eerie scene. Plates with unfinished food, a board game spread across the small table, pieces mid-move, a camera with several undeveloped rolls of film, and in one of the bunks, a child's stuffed bear, tucked neatly under the blanket, but no sign of the family. Outside, the ground was soft from recent rain. Investigators found multiple sets of footprints, the father's boots, the mother's sneakers, the children's smaller tracks, all leading away from the turnout. At first, they kept together heading into the forest. Then, about 100 yards in, they split. Each set wandered off in different directions, scattering like leaves in the wind. Search dogs were brought in. At first, they pulled eagerly, following the tracks. But one by one, they balked, whining, refusing to go further. Handlers described the animals as terrified, tails tucked, ears flat. It was as if they sensed something invisible waiting in the trees. The forest was searched for weeks. Helicopters swept the valley. Volunteers combed ravines and creek beds. Nothing. No clothing, no bones, no signs of animal predation. The Ryersons had simply vanished. Rumors spread quickly, feeding on the silence left behind. Some truckers claimed to see strange lights in the sky over mile 118. In the nights following the disappearance, hovering orbs that flickered blue and white before vanishing. Others spoke of hearing children's voices in the forest while parked at the turnout, calling faintly for help. A few swore they saw figures at the tree line, a man, a woman, 2 children, all standing motionless in the shadows. When headlights swept the spot, the clearing was empty. One trooper, speaking anonymously years later, recalled an experience he never wrote in his report. While walking the forest during the search, he became separated from his partner. The woods grew unnaturally silent. No birds, no insects, just an oppressive stillness. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw a little girl in a blue dress, holding a stuffed bear. She looked exactly like Hannah Ryerson from the missing posters. He froze. She raised her hand as if to wave. Then she stepped backward and seemed to sink into the ground, vanishing like a shadow swallowed by fog. The trooper staggered back to camp, shaken. He never spoke of it publicly again. Folklore offers its own explanations. The Atna people of the region tell stories of the Inua, restless spirits of those who die unnaturally in the wilderness. Some legends warn of the Wendigo-like Nagidalek, a being that lures families into the forest with mimicry, only to consume their essence. Others speak of little people, tricksters who lead travelers astray until they are lost forever. Whether one believes in spirits or not, the case remains baffling. Experienced investigators could not explain why 4 people would abandon food, shelter, and safety. Why they would scatter in different directions, against all survival logic. Or why their tracks simply ended without a trace. Over the decades, new reports have surfaced. Campers along the Glen Highway claim to hear children laughing in the trees at night. Motorists describe seeing a woman in the road, waving frantically, only to vanish when approached. Some insist they've glimpsed an RV parked in that same turnout, looking old and weathered, with figures moving inside. When they slow down, the turnout is empty. In 2004, a hunter camping near mile 118 claimed he woke in the night to the sound of a family talking, muffled voices, laughter, the clink of dishes. Stepping outside his tent, he saw an RV parked at the turnout. Its windows glowed warm yellow, as if lit from within. He could see silhouettes moving, a child's shadow bouncing as if playing. Curious, he approached. But halfway there, the lights went dark. The RV was gone. Only the empty gravel remained, silent beneath the moonlight. The Ryersons were declared legally dead in 1995, 7 years after their disappearance. Their families back in Minnesota hold memorial services, but without graves, closure remains elusive. For Alaskans who drive the Glen, the story is more than tragedy. It is a warning. Don't linger at mile 118. Don't listen if you hear voices in the trees. And if you see an RV parked alone at night, glowing warmly in the darkness, don't approach, because some journeys never end. Some families never make it home, and some highways keep what they take. Whittier, Alaska is a town that feels like a secret. Wedged between towering mountains and Prince William Sound, it is accessible only by sea, by rail, or by one of the strangest roads in America, the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel. This tunnel, nearly 2.5 miles long, was once built for trains during World War II. Today, it serves both vehicles and trains, alternating one-way traffic on the hour. Driving through is an unsettling experience. Headlights cast narrow cones of light against dripping concrete. The air feels damp and stale, and every sound, the rumble of tires, the echo of a car door slamming, magnifies 100-fold. Tourists often describe it as claustrophobic, eerie, like entering another world. For one visitor in 1999, it would become a portal into mystery, and perhaps something far darker. Her name was Denise Holloway, a 42-year-old schoolteacher from Oregon. She had traveled north that summer for what she called her escape trip, a month alone in Alaska to hike, photograph, and drive where the roads ended. Friends later said she was enchanted by remote places, the lonelier, the better. On July 7th, Denise called home from Anchorage. She told her sister she planned to head south to Whittier, spend a night in town, then take a ferry through Prince William Sound. She rented a compact sedan, loaded her camping gear, and set out. That was the last confirmed contact anyone ever had with her. The next morning, she failed to make her ferry. The rental car was eventually discovered not far from the tunnel entrance on the Anchorage side. Inside were her belongings: a camera with fresh film, a sleeping bag, a half-empty water bottle. Her purse still contained cash and credit cards, but Denise was gone. At first, troopers assumed she had gone hiking and gotten lost. The terrain around the tunnel is punishing. Steep cliffs, thick alder, slick rocks that tumble into glacial streams. Search parties scoured the hillsides. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Yet no trace of Denise appeared. Then came the stranger reports. A maintenance worker, stationed inside the tunnel to monitor traffic, claimed that on the night of July 7th he saw a woman walking along the narrow service path that runs beside the tracks. She was wearing a blue jacket matching the description of Denise. But here is the detail that unsettled him most. She wasn't walking with the flow of traffic. She was walking into the tunnel wall. Head down, arms loose, as if in a trance, she stepped directly into the rock. He thought his eyes were playing tricks. The light in the tunnel can create illusions, shadows moving oddly with headlights. But he swore she never came back out. 2 days later, a trucker reported something similar. While waiting for his turn to pass through, he saw a figure standing at the mouth of the tunnel. A woman, slim, mid-40s, with dark hair. She seemed to be staring into the blackness beyond. When he blinked, she was gone. Police reports note that both men gave nearly identical descriptions, despite never speaking to one another. Folklore began to entwine with fact. The Chugach people have long told stories of Nai-In, spirits who dwell in mountains and rock faces, luring the curious into hidden realms from which they never return. Some locals whispered that Denise had been taken by the tunnel, claimed by something that lived in the dripping stone. A Whittier resident, interviewed years later, recalled that the search party brought dogs, but the animals refused to enter the tunnel. They whined, pulled against their leashes, claws scrabbling on the pavement, desperate to stay in daylight. When investigators forced them forward, the dogs froze. Their hackles rose, and they refused to move, staring at the walls as if something were waiting just beyond human sight. There were also the photographs. After Denise's disappearance, troopers developed the rolls of film found in her camera. Most were ordinary, sweeping mountain vistas, roadside lakes, a self-portrait in Anchorage. But the last 3 were strange. One showed the dark mouth of the Whittier tunnel, taken from the outside. The framing was odd, tilted, as if shot in a hurry. The second was darker still, taken from within the tunnel itself. Headlights glow in the distance, but across the wall there is a pale smear, faint and human-shaped. Investigators debated whether it was just motion blur or something else. The third photograph is nearly black. But when brightened, some claimed they could see a face. Not Denise's. A gaunt, hollow-eyed face pressed close to the lens, features stretched unnaturally thin, mouth open as if in a scream. State troopers never released those last photos to the public, but whispers leaked from those who saw them. To this day, hikers occasionally report strange encounters near the tunnel. A couple in 2011 claimed they heard a woman calling for help in the brush above the highway. They searched for an hour but found no one. Others report tapping on their car windows while waiting for the tunnel to open. Faint knocks, like fingernails on glass, though no one is there. Truckers tell of headlights flickering inside the tunnel, as if another vehicle is coming toward them, only for the lights to vanish halfway through, leaving them alone in the dripping dark. Denise Holloway was declared legally dead in 2006. Her family held a service in Oregon, but the mystery haunts them. Why abandon her car and belongings? Why step into one of the most unnerving structures in Alaska, alone, at night? Some say she slipped, fell into a ravine, and her body remains hidden under rocks. Others believe she drowned in the icy waters of Passage Canal. But those who drive through the tunnel after dark whisper a different version, that sometimes, if you glance at the side mirror, you'll see a woman in a blue jacket walking steadily along the narrow service path. Head down, arms loose, and if you look too long, she steps sideways, not into the wall, but into you. The Dalton Highway, known by truckers as one of the most isolated and dangerous roads in North America, is a 414-mile scar of asphalt carved through Alaska's unforgiving Arctic wilderness. Built originally as a supply route for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, it cuts through mountain ranges, frozen rivers, and endless tundra where storms roll in without warning. For hours, sometimes days, travelers see no towns, no gas stations, no lights in the distance, only the road stretching endlessly forward, as if daring them to continue. Tourists often drive it for the thrill, to boast that they've braved one of the world's loneliest roads. But the Dalton doesn't forgive arrogance. It demands preparation, respect, and a steady nerve. Those who underestimate it often vanish, swallowed not just by the wilderness, but by something older, something that seems to wait between the miles, and sometimes it erases those who walk it. In the summer of 2012, two young backpackers from Sweden set out to hike along a stretch of the Dalton Highway. They were seasoned travelers, used to long treks and harsh weather, and they told friends they wanted to experience the real Alaska before heading south again. They were last seen at a small truck stop near Coldfoot, smiling, buying supplies, and asking locals about safe camping areas along the highway. Days later, their tent was discovered about 20 miles up the road, tucked near a ridge overlooking the pipeline. Inside the tent lay their sleeping bags, still unzipped. Food set neatly in containers, uneaten. Two backpacks rested by a rock, zipped and untouched. A small campfire had burned itself to ash, leaving behind only the smell of charred wood. But the strangest detail was the absence of struggle. No torn fabric, no scattered belongings, no wildlife tracks. It looked as though both young men had simply stood up, left the tent, and never came back. Truckers later reported sightings along that same stretch of highway in the nights that followed. One described seeing two figures walking side by side in the middle of the road, both young men, both carrying nothing, both staring straight ahead as if unaware of the 18-wheeler barreling toward them. The driver slammed on his brakes, his tires screeching across the ice, heart pounding in his chest. The figures never flinched. They just kept walking, pale faces briefly caught in the headlights before fading into the night. When the truck came to a stop, there was nothing. No footprints in the snow, no movement in the distance, only the sound of the wind whistling across the open tundra. Another trucker swore he saw them standing on the shoulder, arms hanging limp, watching the vehicles pass. Their clothes matched the description of the missing backpackers. But when he stopped, the road was empty again. Some locals whispered that the Dalton Highway is haunted by the lost ones, spirits of those who froze to death or disappeared into the endless wilderness. Old Inupiat stories tell of wanderers who hear voices in the wind, calling them deeper into the tundra. Those who follow never return. Instead, their spirits remain on the road, walking endlessly, searching for warmth they will never find. The disappearance of the two backpackers became tangled with these legends. Locals said the boys were lured by something unseen. Lights in the distance, voices whispering in a language they didn't understand, footsteps that made them believe they weren't alone. Whatever drew them out of their tent that night left no trace, no clue, only silence. The Dalton Highway, they said, doesn't just test survival. It tests the mind, and sometimes the mind loses. Those who do not return become part of the road itself. Their shadows linger in the snow. Their faces appear in headlights. Their steps echo long after they are gone. On the Dalton, death does not sleep. And on the Dalton, it walks with the living. To this day, the two Swedish backpackers have never been found. Their names remain in international missing persons databases, their families still waiting for answers across an ocean. The only proof of their journey is a few photos on their cameras, showing them smiling at the truck stop, unaware that it would be the last image anyone ever saw of them alive. Truckers still whisper about the Dalton Highway and its phantoms. Some refuse to drive certain stretches at night. Others admit they sometimes glance into their mirrors and see two shapes walking behind them in the glow of the taillights, only to vanish when they blink. The Dalton is more than a road. It is a line between the living and the lost, and when night falls, it reminds every traveler of a chilling truth. Once the wilderness takes you, it does not give you back. So if you ever drive that highway, and you see two pale figures walking side by side in the darkness, keep your eyes forward. Do not stop. Do not look too long. Because the Dalton Highway remembers its dead, and it may be waiting for you to join them. Denali, the crown of Alaska, is not just a mountain. It is a monument of ice, stone, and shadow. Rising 20,010 feet into the northern sky, it is the tallest peak in North America. Its slopes a frozen labyrinth where avalanches thunder like the voice of a god, and storms descend without warning, swallowing everything in their path. To climb Denali is to gamble with a force older than memory itself. Climbers from across the world dream of standing on its summit, but the mountain does not yield easily. It has taken more than 100 lives, and each year it demands new sacrifices. Locals speak of Denali as if it were alive, watching and listening, waiting for pride to reveal itself in those who dare its ridges. Some disappear in ways that make sense. Buried in avalanches, lost in storms, consumed by crevasses so deep no rope could reach. But others vanish in ways no one can explain, as if the mountain itself had swallowed them whole. One of the most disturbing disappearances came in May 2011. 3 climbers from Japan, highly experienced, disciplined, and respected in the mountaineering world, arrived in Alaska to attempt the Cassin Ridge, a daunting, knife-edged route rarely climbed even by professionals. Their names were Tatsuya, Kenji, and Hiroshi. They had trained together for years, facing the Andes and even the Himalayas. Denali, to them, was the next great conquest. The climb began with promise. At base camp, rangers noted their efficiency, their quiet confidence. They logged their route plan, checked their radios, and moved steadily up the glacier. Other climbers remembered their politeness, their precision. Everything suggested success. For nearly a week, their reports came in clear. The ascent was difficult but manageable. They described setting camps, battling winds, pushing forward despite exhaustion. Then, on the morning of May 26th, came the last radio transmission. Their voices were calm but tired. They mentioned worsening weather, clouds rolling down the ridge, wind sharpening like blades, but nothing in their tone suggested panic. They signed off, promising to check in again once the skies cleared. That call was the last anyone ever heard from them. Days passed. When their expected return window closed, Denali Rangers launched a search. Helicopters rose above the glacier, eyes scanning for color against white. Spotters swept every ridge, every snowfield, every possible camp location. But nothing appeared. No tents, no rope lines, no broken ice to mark a fall. It was as if the mountain had erased them. Rangers, hardened by years of tragedy, admitted this case disturbed them. "Usually we find something," one said later. A torn backpack, a glove half buried in snow, some sign of a fall, but this time, nothing. They were gone, like the mountain had decided to keep them. For the families in Japan, the news was unbearable. They flew to Alaska, staring up at Denali's vastness, begging for closure. But Denali offered none. The mountain remained silent. It is here that legend bleeds into fact. Locals whispered of the White Lady of Denali, a ghost said to roam the upper ridges. Some say she was a woman betrayed centuries ago, left to die in the cold, her spirit bound to the peak. Climbers claim to glimpse her when storms roll in, a pale figure moving against the wind, impossible to reach, impossible to follow. She appears when death is near, they say, choosing who will not return. Older still are the tales of the Athabascans, the native people who lived at Denali's base long before climbers arrived. To them, Denali was not just a mountain, it was a sacred being, a living entity. They warned, never boast of conquering it, never mock its silence. Those who disrespected it would be taken, not killed in the ordinary sense, but claimed. Their bodies, their spirits, absorbed into the mountain, forever unseen. The vanished Japanese climbers became part of this mythology. Weeks stretched into months. Summer melted snow, exposing wreckage of past expeditions, but not theirs. No gear, no rope, no trace of the three men appeared. They had walked into the cloud and never returned. And yet, stories began to circulate from other expeditions. One American climber, resting at 14,000 feet, reported hearing laughter at night, faint, distant, echoing across the snowfield. His team was asleep and no other groups were near. Another swore he saw three figures high on a ridgeline under the northern lights. They stood motionless, watching, silhouettes against the aurora's green glow. By morning, no footprints marred the snow. A Swiss climber, trembling at base camp, described something stranger. While roping across a crevasse, he felt a hand grip his shoulder from behind. He turned, expecting a teammate. No one was there, only the endless white. He returned home early, vowing never to climb Denali again. These accounts are easy to dismiss as fatigue, hypoxia, or the tricks of an exhausted mind. Yet they echo too closely with each other, repeating the same elements. Laughter where none should be, figures where no tracks exist. The sensation of a presence just beyond vision. For rescuers, the disappearance remained a scar. Some quietly admitted they no longer trusted Denali's silence. "It watches," one ranger whispered after retiring. "You can feel it. Sometimes you're up there, and it's like the mountain doesn't want you. It lets you know. Years have passed, but the mystery endures." The Japanese climbers' families hold memorials with no graves to tend. Their names live only in whispers among the climbing community. Wrangell-St. Elias National Park is not just the largest national park in the United States. It is an endless kingdom of wilderness. Larger than the entire country of Switzerland, its mountains rise like frozen fortresses. Its glaciers snake through valleys like rivers of time, and its forests stretch on into silence so complete it feels almost sacred. But for all its beauty, Wrangell-St. Elias carries a darker reputation among Alaskans. Hunters vanish here, often without trace, swallowed by the wild. The park has seen its share of accidents, avalanches, bear maulings, hypothermia, but many disappearances defy explanation. No tracks, no camps, no gear ever recovered. In Alaska, people call these places the vanishing grounds, places where the land itself seems hungry. And among the most chilling stories is that of three hunters who set out in the autumn of 2004, never to return. Their names were Daniel, Michael, and Paul, lifelong friends from Anchorage who had been hunting together since their teenage years. That fall, they chose Wrangell-St. Elias for their moose hunt, a trip that promised both challenge and reward. They loaded their rifles, their packs heavy with supplies, and hired a bush pilot to drop them in a remote valley near the Tibet Lakes. The plan was simple: spend 10 days in the backcountry, track moose along the river, then rendezvous with the plane for pickup. The pilot, an old Alaskan named Harris, remembered them clearly. "Good boys," he later told investigators. Excited, maybe a little overconfident, but they knew what they were doing. He dropped them in clear weather, watched them wave as he banked the plane, and thought little of it. But when he returned 10 days later, the hunters were gone. Not just gone from the landing site, gone without a trace. The campsite where they were supposed to be waiting was never used. No fire pit, no trampled grass, no sign they had ever set up shelter. Searchers scoured the valley, expecting to find them deeper in the brush, maybe delayed in their hunt. But the forest gave up nothing. For weeks, helicopters swept the valleys, rangers on foot combed the trails, dogs sniffed along the river. Still nothing. No rifles, no clothing, no footprints in the mud. The men had simply vanished. Harris, the pilot, swore he had dropped them exactly at the agreed location. Investigators checked his logs. The flight path matched, but of the hunters there was not a trace. Locals began whispering almost immediately. Wrangell-St. Elias, they said, is full of old stories. The Athabascans believed spirits walked the land, jealous guardians of its rivers and mountains. Some hunters swore that if you disrespected the wilderness, by taking more than you needed, by mocking the animals you killed, the land would take you in return. "You won't die," one elder told reporters. "You'll just disappear. The forest will keep you." But the case grew darker when strange reports surfaced from other hunters in the same region. One man claimed that during his own hunt, a week after the disappearance, he heard voices calling his name in the fog. He assumed it was his partner's, until he realized the voices belonged to no one he knew. Another swore he saw 3 men standing across the river at dusk, dressed in camouflage, their faces pale. When he called out, the figures turned and melted into the trees without a sound. Then there was the hunter who woke in the middle of the night to find someone standing outside his tent. He could see the silhouette against the firelight, broad-shouldered, carrying a rifle. Relieved, he thought it was a friend. But when he stepped outside, the clearing was empty. Only the trees, silent and still, the fire crackling alone. Searchers grew uneasy. Wrangell-St. Elias is dangerous, yes, but hunters usually leave behind evidence. A blood trail, dropped supplies, something. But in this case, the wilderness remained pristine, as if the 3 men had never set foot in it. As weeks turned into months, the official explanation leaned toward accident. Some suggested they had crossed the river, been swept away by current, their bodies carried into the glacier-fed waters. Others theorized a bear attack, though no remains were ever found. The families rejected these answers. Daniel's sister said, "If they had been attacked, we'd have found something, a rifle, a pack, anything," but nothing was ever found. Over the years, the story of the vanished hunters became part of Alaskan lore. Newcomers were told never to hunt near the Tibet Lakes alone, never to ignore the feeling of being watched in those valleys. Old-timers claimed the men were still out there, walking the ridges at night. Some said their spirits were trapped, repeating the hunt forever, searching for a kill they would never find. The eeriest testimony came from a pair of hikers in 2012, 8 years after the disappearance. They were camping near Tibet when they woke to the sound of branches snapping. Assuming it was a moose, they stepped out with headlamps. Instead, their beams fell on 3 men standing at the tree line. The figures didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. The hikers shouted, but the men remained silent. And then, as if swallowed by mist, they were gone. No tracks marked the ground. The hikers fled at dawn, shaken to the core. When they later described the men to locals, one detail stood out. The clothing matched the style of early 2000s hunting gear, outdated by nearly a decade. To this day, the hunters' families hold on to photographs, to birthdays that pass without candles, to anniversaries marked only by grief. Wrangell-St. Elias never returned their sons. No remains have surfaced. No gear, no rifles, no answers. Only silence. The park remains beautiful, breathtaking. Kenai Peninsula is often called the playground of Alaska, a land of sapphire fjords, endless spruce forests, and salmon-filled rivers that shimmer like liquid silver. Tourists flood here each summer, chasing the midnight sun, photographing bears fishing in the rivers, marveling at glaciers that creak and groan as if alive. But beyond the postcard beauty lies something else. In the shadow of its forests, among valleys where the mist never seems to lift, are places locals avoid. Places where even seasoned hunters will not camp. Places where the land feels wrong. One of the darkest legends of the peninsula is that of the so-called cursed cabin. To some, it is a ghost story told around firelight. To others, it is a real, rotting structure still hidden in the wilderness, a trap for those who wander too close. And to families who lost loved ones there, it is neither legend nor metaphor, but a wound that never healed. The story begins in the late 1970s, when two brothers from Soldotna, Peter and James, set out for a week-long hunting trip deep in the Kenai backcountry. The weather was fair, the season promising. They planned to hunt caribou, camp near one of the smaller lakes, and return before the first snows. They were well-equipped, experienced outdoorsmen, comfortable in Alaska's unforgiving wild. When they failed to return, searchers expected to find a camp, tracks, or signs of struggle. Instead, they found something far stranger. Days into the search, a rescue team stumbled upon an old log cabin half-collapsed in the forest. It wasn't on any maps, and none of the locals remembered anyone ever living there. The windows were broken, the roof sagged, and the door leaned half off its hinges. Inside, the cabin was empty, except for 2 hunting rifles leaning against the wall. They were registered to Peter and James, but there were no bodies. No packs, no clothing, no footprints leading away. The rifles stood like offerings, as if the brothers had left them behind willingly. Despite weeks of searching, the men were never found. The cabin's existence soon became the center of rumors. Some said it was a trap, built long ago by a hermit who had murdered travelers and hidden their remains. Others whispered it was cursed ground, a place where voices called to you in the night until you lost your mind and wandered into the forest forever. Over the years, more disappearances followed. In 1987, a pair of hikers vanished in the same region. A year later, a hunter was found miles from his camp, stumbling half-mad, insisting he had heard children crying from the trees. His friends claimed he was never the same again, waking at night screaming about the faces in the window. In the 1990s, a fisherman went missing. His boat was recovered on the shore of a remote lake, his gear still neatly packed, but the man himself had vanished. Local searchers once again reported stumbling across the cabin. This time the door was shut tight. When they pried it open, the interior was coated in dust, the rifles still leaning in the same place. But there were new carvings on the walls, words etched deep into the wood. The rescuers would not repeat the phrases, claiming they were too disturbing. But one line leaked into local lore. "It wants us inside." What it was, no one could say. Even today, stories circulate among bush pilots and hunters. A pilot in 2003 claimed to see smoke rising from the forest where no camps were marked. Circling lower, he thought he spotted a cabin roof among the trees. But when he flew over again days later, the smoke was gone, and so was the cabin. Some locals insist the cabin is not fixed to one place at all. They say it appears only when it chooses, drawing the lost and weary toward its rotting frame. To step inside is to surrender yourself, leaving behind only silence. Psychologists might dismiss the tales as wilderness paranoia. Long nights, endless forests, exhaustion, and the mind's hunger for meaning can twist reality into ghosts. But what of the rifles left standing, unmoved for decades? What of the searchers who swore the cabin looked different each time, as if rebuilt between visits? And then there are the voices. Too many survivors, too many hardened men, tell the same story. That in those woods, as darkness closes in, you hear something whispering. Sometimes it is your name. Sometimes it is the cry of a child. Sometimes it is laughter. But always it comes from just beyond the tree line, pulling you deeper into the shadows. The cursed cabin of Kenai has never been placed officially on any map. Park authorities refuse to confirm its existence, and when asked, they brush off the story as folk legend. But among Alaskans, the warnings are real. Don't stray too deep into the Kenai backcountry. Don't follow strange lights in the woods. And if you see a cabin that shouldn't be there, turn back. Don't go inside, because those who do never return. To this day, the families of Peter and James keep their photographs framed, their rifles forever lost in that rotting shelter. Hunters speak of sudden dread in those woods, of feeling watched, of hearing doors creak where no cabin should exist. And late at night, some still whisper, "The cabin is waiting. It is not abandoned. It is not empty. It is alive." Resurrection Bay lies on the southern coast of Alaska, a vast inlet surrounded by jagged mountains and cold, dark waters that plunge hundreds of feet deep. From the small town of Seward, boats drift out into its stillness, carrying fishermen, whale watchers, and tourists who marvel at glaciers that calve with thunder into the sea. It is one of Alaska's most photographed places, beautiful, serene, timeless. But beneath the surface of that beauty lies a depth colder than ice, darker than night. The bay has always been a place of stories. The Sugpiaq people, who lived along the coast for generations, spoke of spirits that moved through the water like shadows, pulling down those who dared to stray too far. They warned that the sea was alive, that it remembered every life it had taken. The Russians who came later told their own tales. Ghost ships glimpsed through the fog, fishermen who vanished between casts of the net. And locals in Seward still whisper of the strange silences in the bay, moments when the gulls stop calling, when even the waves seem to hold their breath. In the summer of 1995, a tourist named Elaine Matthews traveled to Seward from Oregon. She was in her late 30s, an avid photographer, known among friends for her love of remote landscapes. Alaska had been her dream trip, 2 weeks to hike, camp, and photograph the untamed wilderness. She arrived alone, carrying a pack heavy with lenses and rolls of film, eager to capture the raw beauty of the Kenai Peninsula. Elaine was last seen on a bright morning in July. She rented a small kayak from a local outfitter and set out into Resurrection Bay. The sea was calm, the weather fair, and she told the shopkeeper she would be back by evening. She never returned. When night fell and her kayak was not returned, searchers went out into the bay. At first they assumed an accident. Perhaps she had capsized, drowned, her body carried out to sea. But within a day her kayak was found, drifting near Fox Island. Inside lay her camera bag, still zipped. Her life jacket floated neatly beside it, not torn, not lost, but unfastened, as if carefully removed. But Elaine herself was gone. Investigators developed theories. Maybe she had disembarked, wandered the island, and gotten lost. Yet no tracks marked the beaches. Dogs brought in for the search picked up no scent. Planes circled overhead, scanning for a body in the water. Nothing. It was as if she had stepped out of her kayak and dissolved into the air. The camera was developed, and the last photographs chilled everyone who saw them. They showed ordinary scenes at first: the rocky shoreline, the glittering surface of the bay, a distant whale's tail breaking the water. But the final roll ended with 3 unsettling frames. The first showed a fog creeping across the water, though weather reports insisted the day had been clear. The second showed something darker, a shape on the surface, distant, impossible to identify. It could have been driftwood. It could have been something else. The third was the most disturbing. It was a photograph of the kayak itself, taken from the waterline, as though someone else had been floating alongside her. No face appeared, no hand, no reflection of Elaine in the lens. Just the kayak, empty, its paddle resting across it, the bay stretching away into silence. After this discovery, theories grew darker. Some said she had been pulled under by the whirlpools that sometimes form in the bay. Others suggested foul play, though no evidence supported it. But locals began to speak in whispers of something else. They said Elaine had seen the bay's ghosts, that the fog had not been weather, but a veil, that the shape in the water was one of the long shadows the Sugpiaq warned of, spirits of the drowned rising to claim her. Fishermen began to tell stories of strange sights after Elaine's disappearance. One claimed to see a woman's figure standing on Fox Island's shore at dusk, waving silently as boats passed. When they circled back, no one was there. Another swore that late one night, while pulling in nets, he heard the click of a camera shutter just behind him. Turning, he found only darkness. Kayakers reported unease too. Some said they saw another kayak drifting, always just beyond reach. It looked empty. But sometimes in the half-light, they swore they saw a woman sitting inside, pale, silent, staring. When they paddled closer, the kayak would vanish into mist. Elaine's family held vigils, clinging to hope. But Resurrection Bay never returned her. No body ever washed ashore. No clothing, no trace. Only the photographs remained, haunting proof of a final day that should have been filled with beauty, but ended in silence. And still, to this day, guides warn visitors not to kayak alone. They tell the story of Elaine Matthews not as a tourist's tragedy, but as a warning. "The bay is watching," one old fisherman mutters. "It likes to keep what it takes." Resurrection Bay, with its name that suggests rebirth, instead became Elaine's grave, or perhaps something worse. Some say she is still out there, drifting with the tides, camera in hand, searching for the perfect photograph. Others believe she has joined the spirits beneath the water, another voice in the eternal silence, waiting to pull down the next who dares to enter alone. And so the bay endures, stunning, breathtaking, but haunted by more than history. Next time you find yourself on its waters, with the waves gentle against your kayak and the mountains mirrored on the surface, listen closely. If the gulls fall silent, if the water turns still, if you hear the faint click of a shutter with no camera near, look around carefully, because Resurrection Bay does not forget. And it may already be watching you.